Thank you. And I'd like to thank the Minister for coming in place of the Minister for Foreign Affairs to answer this particular question, which we have raised with him previously, raised with him now again, partly on the issue of the risk register, but also on the issue of uniting Ireland. And before I begin, I'd like to welcome Caroline Mulvaney to the Chamber, who has been working in my office on a number of research reports, and I hope she found some benefit and definitely some insight into politics in Ireland, as opposed to how it works in the United States of America. Minister, over the last number of days, we've had everybody from the head of the Orange Order to even today in the Irish Times, Simon Carswell, interviewing members of the UVF in the north about the issue of unifying Ireland or united Ireland. And the concern is that in the 2019 National Risk Assessment done by the Taoiseach's Department, which is fed into by all government departments and all government agencies, there is no mention of the possibility or probability of there ever being a united Ireland. Bear in mind, the National Risk Register started in 2014. It has every topic literally under the sun, starting with global warming, global terrorism, the issue of cybersecurity. It has the issue of the healthcare crisis, the housing crisis, and under the issue of instability in Northern Ireland, it has the issue of Stormont not being in session. It also discusses the issue of the possibility of another referendum in Scotland on Scottish independence. But it does not mention at all, anywhere in the National Risk Assessment, the possibility or probability of there ever being a referendum on a united Ireland. When myself and Deputy Sean Fleming asked the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach the question as to why the issue of uniting the people of Ireland, the main aim of the state under Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution, is not in our National Risk Assessment, the Taoiseach's reply was that he did not see it as a risk, but it was too important and too sensitive to be in the National Risk Assessment. The Taoiseach's reply, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, on the issue of a referendum and the preparation required for a referendum, which would come under not only his department but the entire government, as to what they were doing about that issue, was that they would deal with it when the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland calls the referendum. Now, as we all know from Brexit, you need long-term planning and engagement long in advance of ever holding a referendum. The lesson for Brexit in Ireland's case is that you should not call a referendum and then try to figure out the future. But what the Department of Foreign Affairs, in their response to myself and Deputy Sean Fleming, are saying is they will do the preparation when the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland calls it. There was a court case in Belfast under which a unionist took the Secretary of State to court to try and find out and to force her to come up with a policy on how she would determine that the majority of people are in favour of united Ireland as provided for in the Good Friday Agreement, and she refused to come up with a policy. But under the powers of the Northern Ireland Act, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of State alone decides who gets to vote in that referendum. Now that has all the potential for chaos, has all the issues of risk, and that is why myself and Deputy Fleming, we made a submission to the National Risk Assessment, and we asked that the government would include the issue of a new agreed Ireland and a referendum on a new agreed Ireland in this year's 2019 National Risk Assessment. It has not mentioned it in any National Risk Assessment since 2014. And yet, they again refused to put it in the draft risk assessment, even though we highlighted the issue to the Taoiseach's office. And I'd be interested to hear the response from the Department of Foreign Affairs as to why the main aim of this state is not appearing anywhere in our national planning.
Thank you. Minister, to respond.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and on behalf of the Taoiseach, I would like to thank you, Senator, for raising this matter. It's important that I say this first of all, and I think that it's important for us to remember that Brexit, the issue of Brexit, is separate and distinct from a border poll, and I think that is important to say that, and I believe that to be the case. Can I say that the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and the subsequent agreements is a priority for the Government. The approach of the Government in relation to Irish unity is of course guided by Article 3 of the Constitution, as amended by the people in 1998. The principle of consent and the possibility of change in the constitutional status of Northern Ireland are fundamental elements of the Good Friday Agreement, endorsed by the people of this island, both north and south. And I think it's worth recalling here the precise wording and provisions of the Good Friday Agreement in this regard. Under the agreement, the Irish and British governments firstly recognise the legitimacy of whatever choice is freely exercised by a majority of people in Northern Ireland with regard to its status, whether they prefer to continue to support the union with Britain or a sovereign united Ireland. Secondly, recognise that it is for the people of Ireland alone, by agreement between the two parts respectively, and without internal impediment, to exercise their right of self-determination on the basis of consent, freely and concurrently given north and south, to bring about a united Ireland. If that is their wish, accepting that this right must be achieved and exercised with the subject to the agreement and consent of the majority of people in Northern Ireland. And thirdly, affirm that if in the future the people of the island of Ireland exercise their right of self-determination on the basis set out above, it will be a binding obligation on both governments to introduce and support in their respective parliaments legislation to give effect to that wish. The holding of a referendum in this jurisdiction is therefore connected with the calling of a border poll under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland. While the decision to hold such a poll in Northern Ireland rests with the Secretary of State in Northern Ireland, the Government of Ireland does not believe it likely at present that such a border poll in the near future would result in a decision of the majority of the people of Northern Ireland in favour of constitutional change. In these circumstances, it is the Government's view that a referendum on Irish unity against the background of the ongoing political impasse in Northern Ireland and the increased uncertainty created by Brexit would only add to the uncertainty and the division at an already difficult and sensitive time for all of us on the island of Ireland. In the absence of the prospect of a referendum in the near future, the Government has not made specific preparations on this issue and does not have immediate plans to do so. The Government's immediate priorities are twofold: to ensure the protection of the agreement in all its parts and the gains and benefits of the peace process in the context of the UK withdrawal from the EU, and to secure the functioning of the evolved power-sharing institutions in Northern Ireland and the North-South Ministerial Council. And as the Senator is aware, the Government is currently actively involved in talks to achieve that process. Issues of risk in relation to Northern Ireland are considered as part of, if you like, the annual National Risk Assessment. Although a border poll would not be regarded as a risk, and the very important and sensitive political issues related to it, it would not be dealt with in the risk assessment process. The question of relationship on the island of Ireland and between Ireland and Britain are always considered as part of the annual National Risk Assessment, always considered. In this regard, the National Risk Assessment was one of the first official acknowledgements of the risk posed by a potential Brexit, including associated risks with Northern Ireland, further reflecting the Government's commitment to identifying, preparing for and mitigating risk. Earlier this week, the Government published its updated Brexit Contingency Action Plan, and this reflects the extensive work which has been taking place at EU level and on a whole of government basis, including the Brexit Omnibus Act, to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. And it sets out the next steps to be taken between now and, of course, the 31st of October. It also makes clear that it will pose particular risks for the Good Friday Agreement.
Sorry? We need you to finish up.
Okay. For all Ireland economy and for Northern Ireland's economy, political stability and community relations. And can I just say, I want to make it clear that in the event of a future referendum within the consent of the Good Friday Agreement, the Government has confirmed it will make all necessary preparations according with the terms of the Constitution and the principles of the procedure of the Agreement.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Daly.
Yep. And thank you, Minister. And just in relation to your last reply, the Government is obviously not in your last statement where you said you would prepare for the referendum when it is triggered by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Clearly the Government isn't learning the lesson of Brexit, whereby it will only take action when the referendum is called. We all know, including the Chair, that a referendum needs to be, especially on this issue of unifying Ireland, needs long-term engagement, years of engagement, not just when the Secretary of State calls a referendum, which would only give months. And finally, I just want to point out what the Taoiseach's own statement in the National Risk Assessment 2018 about the overview. He said, the aim of the National Risk Assessment was to counteract groupthink and to ensure all voices are heard by government. It seeks to prevent a repeat of mistakes of the past when dissenting voices were not heeded, leading to catastrophic consequences for the people of Ireland. And for the reply from the Taoiseach and previously from the Taoiseach to say that they did not see a border poll as a risk, but it was too sensitive to be in the National Risk Assessment, beggars belief. And even you, Minister, must be questioning the reply you were asked to give here today to state that although a border poll would not be regarded as a risk and the very important and sensitive policy issues related to it would not be dealt with in the National Risk Assessment, even though we deal with everything from global terrorism to global warming to the housing crisis.
Thank you, Senator.
Crisis, we are not willing to deal with the main aim of the state inside in the National Risk Assessment.
Senator Moira Devine.
Sorry, could I just... do I have a response?
Very quickly,
Minister. Yeah, very quickly. There's two issues here. Number one, that you've mentioned Brexit on a number of occasions. That is in the risk assessment. Brexit is separate and distinct from a border poll. Also, Brexit is not a method of unifying Ireland. And by the way, there have been two distinct opinion polls, and opinion polls have been taken consistently in both Northern Ireland. And the latest one was taken in March 2019 by the Irish Times, which said that 38% of people thought there should be a border poll. Only 38% in Northern Ireland. And 32...
Senator, no. Senator, no.
But also
I'm not asking for a border poll.
Senator Daly, please take your seat. Senator, take your seat.
The lesson for Brexit is you don't call a referendum and then,
take your seat.
Only 32%.
They were willing to do.
Only 32% of people would favour unification at this time.
Take your seat. That they would vote for United Ireland in the event of a hard Brexit.
I think you're not reflecting the views of people in Northern Ireland.
Minister,
have to be reflected.
Minister, I'm moving on.
Based on the Good Friday.
I'm moving on. Senator Moira Devine.